Okay, let's talk about strength. What does it actually mean, to be strong? Often we think about, well, the doing, right? Pushing through things, achieving stuff.
Mm-hmm. Action-oriented.
Exactly. But what if emotional strength isn't just about what you do? What if it's really about what you consciously choose not to do, what you avoid?
That's a really interesting way to frame it because, yeah, we're so focused on actions, on what we can see, but so much resilience is internal, isn't it? It's about the things you don't let yourself get caught up in.
Precisely. And that difference, which feels subtle but is actually huge, that's what we're diving into today.
Mm.
We've been looking at this source material, a text called Chapter 17,
Right.
and it lays out this really fascinating list, 15 specific things that, according to the source, emotionally strong people simply don't do.
It's kind of like a what not to do guide for emotional health, which,
Right.
flips usual advice on its head.
Totally. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Unpack this list from Chapter 17. We'll go through each one, try to understand the why behind it according to the text, and see what useful insights we can pull out. Think of it as maybe a shortcut to understanding resilience from this angle of omission.
Yeah, and for you listening, maybe think about which of these points jump out at you, which ones feel familiar, maybe even uncomfortable, or which ones are just, wow, totally surprising.
Welcome. Let's get into it. Ready for number one?
Let's do it.
Okay. So, first point from the source. Emotionally strong people do not believe every single feeling they have means something significant. The text says they don't automatically assign value or truth to everything they feel.
This feels foundational, really. The source seems to be saying, look, just because a feeling is intense or you feel really convicted about it, that doesn't make it inherently true or important.
Yeah.
Feelings are like data points, maybe, but they're not the whole picture.
That's such a relief, actually, when you internalize that. Think about how much time and energy we can waste treating every little irritation or, fear like some profound statement about reality.
Right.
The strength here, it seems, is being able to just notice a feeling, okay, I'm feeling anxious, without immediately letting it dictate your actions or your view of the world.
It's about creating a bit of space, isn't it, between the feeling and the self.
Yeah. Okay, building on that.
Mm-hmm.
Point number 2. They aren't threatened by not being right.
Ah, this is a good one. What the source points out here is that understanding you were, say, misinformed about something or just plain wrong, it doesn't have to invalidate you as a person.
Right.
Their sense of self-worth isn't totally wrapped up in needing to be intellectually perfect all the time.
That feels huge. I mean, there's so much pressure sometimes to be right, to win the argument.
Hmm.
But the source suggests real strength is feeling secure enough to say, oh, okay, I didn't know that, or, I see that differently now, without feeling diminished.
Yeah, it opens you up to actually learning instead of just defending.
Yeah. It moves you from a proving mindset to a learning one.
Exactly.
Okay, now, number 3 might sound a bit contradictory at first glance. They do not use logic to deny their emotions.
Yeah, this is where it gets nuanced. So the source explains that they do validate feelings. They acknowledge them first. They don't immediately say, well, logically, this feeling is stupid, so I shouldn't feel it.
Ah,
What they avoid doing, according to the text, is telling themselves or someone else that they shouldn't feel a certain way if, well, they clearly do feel that way.
got it. So it's not about trying to argue yourself out of a feeling using logic. It's the difference between, say, I feel sad, but that's illogical because my life is good, versus, okay, sadness is here right now, acknowledged.
Precisely. One uses logic almost as a weapon against the feeling. The other uses awareness to simply see it. Acknowledging it is the first step, not necessarily agreeing with its logic.
Okay. Point 4 kind of bundles a couple of things.
Mm.
They do not project meaning onto everything, and especially don't assume things are always about them. And the source connects this to not comparing themselves constantly to others. It calls comparison mindless at best and selfish at worst.
I think the link there, according to the source, is that both come from this very self-focused filter. Always thinking, what does this mean for me? Or how do I stack up against them?
Right.
It's incredibly training. The text suggests strong people just don't expend that mental energy making everything personal or getting lost in those comparison games.
Think about the freedom in that. Not automatically wondering if that colleague's short email means they're mad at you, or feeling jealous when a friend shares good news instead of just being happy for them.
It's shifting away from self-absorption towards just dealing with reality more directly, which ties into the next one, actually.
Point 5. They do not need to prove their power.
Yeah, the source describes their general vibe as like peaceful, at ease, not needing to project this big image of being invincible or always in control.
It's that quiet confidence idea, isn't it? The strength isn't in the loud display, it's internal. The source actually says this peacefulness is the mark of genuine security. If you're truly secure, you don't need to prove anything.
Strength is just being, not performing.
Okay, number 6. This one feels a bit tough.
Yeah.
They do not avoid pain, even if they are afraid of it.
Yeah, this is critical in the source material. It talks about, consciously coping with discomfort. Maybe it's facing down an old habit or really digging into the messy roots of a relationship issue, even though it's hard.
Hmm.
And the core idea offered is really interesting. Often the real discomfort, the long-term suffering, comes from the avoidance of the pain, not the pain itself.
Wow. Okay, so the difficult conversation itself might be unpleasant short term, but the years spent dancing around it, that creates its own kind of chronic pain.
Exactly. The strength is the willingness to face that short-term difficulty for a better long-term outcome, to engage with reality, basically.
Even the unpleasant parts.
Yeah.
Okay. Point 7. They do not seek out other people's flaws just to diminish their strengths.
The source gives a really clear example here. Someone shares a success, and the immediate reaction isn't, that's great, but rather, yeah, but remember when you failed at X? Or pointing out some flaw?
Oh, I've all seen that happen.
Yeah.
Or maybe even done it, unfortunately. Someone gets a promotion, and the first thought is about why they didn't deserve it.
Right. The text suggests that people who don't do this, who can genuinely celebrate others or just acknowledge their strengths without needing to find fault, they likely have an inner security. They aren't threatened.
It's like their sense of self isn't diminished by someone else's light shining.
It's a kind of generosity that comes from feeling okay within yourself.
All right, number 8 feels very down to earth. They don't complain.
Yeah.
Well, excessively, not too much.
And the source offers an interesting insight into the why behind complaining. It suggests that often it's less about actually solving the stated problem and more about seeking validation, wanting others to see and acknowledge your struggle or pain.
Ah, okay. So it's like a bid for connection or empathy, even if the complaint itself isn't the core issue.
Potentially, yeah. So the text implies strong people might have other, maybe more direct ways of getting that validation or processing difficulties, ways that aren't just repeating the problem over and over.
So frequent complaining could be a flag for an unmet need for, say, affirmation, and the strength is finding a better way to meet that need.
Could be. Identifying what's really going on beneath the surface complaint.
Okay. Point 9 is about managing fear, not filtering experiences to catastrophize.
Yeah, this is the A to Z thinking, right? Jumping immediately to the absolute worst possible outcome based on, minimal evidence.
Mm-hmm.
The source suggests this often comes from a lack of confidence in your own ability to handle things if something unexpected does happen.
That makes perfect sense. If you deep down doubt your ability to cope, then every little uncertainty feels like impending doom.
Right. And the source adds this really potent consequence. If you're always mentally preparing for the absolute worst, you effectively rob yourself of the best. You close yourself off to positive possibilities by fixating only on the negative.
You pay a huge mental tax for constantly bracing for impact.
You really do.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Point 10. Not keeping a rigid list of things people should or shouldn't do.
The source really highlights how subjective right and wrong can be in many situations, believing there's one single universal code of conduct that everyone must adhere to. Well, according to the text, that's basically setting yourself up for constant disappointment.
Oh, the frustration of expecting the entire world to operate according to your personal rulebook.
Exactly.
So the strength here isn't about having no morals, but about recognizing that while you have your values, trying to impose them as law onto everyone else is just futile and frustrating. It's about allowing for complexity.
It encourages understanding, maybe, over just rigid judgment.
And that flows right into point 11, applying it to how we interact. Not considering themselves the judge of what's right or wrong, especially when giving advice.
Yeah, the source specifically uses the example of giving advice to friends. Strong people, it says, don't automatically assume that their ideal way of handling a situation is the solution everyone else needs or should follow.
Right. So if a friend asks for advice, it's less about saying, okay, here's the right thing to do, and more about offering perspective, maybe asking questions, helping them figure out their own best path.
Respecting that their context, their values might lead them to a different conclusion than yours.
It's about facilitating their process, not dictating it.
Well put.
Point 12 touches on perspective, but like on a macro level, not drawing general conclusions about humanity from only personal experiences.
The source is pretty direct here. It says they don't make these sweeping generalizations about, say, all people or human nature based just on the, frankly, tiny percentage of the world they encounter day to day.
That feels incredibly relevant right now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's so easy to see things in your own social circle or newsfeed and assume, well, this is just how things are.
Yeah, the strength is recognizing the limits of your own viewpoint, your own data set. It's intellectual humility, really.
Knowing your experience isn't universal truth.
Right.
Okay, 13 is about being real, not changing their personality based on who they're around.
The source acknowledges something important here. Pretty much everyone fears rejection on some level. That's human.
Sure.
But the contrast it draws is key. While that fear is common, not everyone allows themselves the vulnerability required to potentially experience real acceptance, the kind that only comes when you show up as you genuinely are, warts and all, consistently.
Yeah, the energy drain of constantly adjusting who you are for different people. It must be exhausting.
Totally. So the strength, according to the source, lies in having enough inner security to risk potential rejection for the chance of authentic connection.
Choosing authenticity, even if it feels risky.
It's a brave choice.
Point 14 deals with conflict. They can stand up for themselves without being aggressive or defensive.
And the source makes a really sharp distinction here. It says aggressiveness or defensiveness. Those are actually signs of insecurity. They're fear-based reactions.
Okay.
Whereas calmly stating your needs or holding a boundary clearly, that is presented as the indicator of real inner resolve and self-worth.
That's such an important difference.
Yeah.
True strength isn't about puffing up your chest or building walls. It's about, like, calm self-possession. One comes from fear, the other comes from security.
Yeah, assertiveness rooted in value, not in fear.
And that brings us to the last one, number 15. Not assuming that whatever this is always the way their life will be.
The core idea from the source here seems to be this constant awareness, a kind of conscious understanding that things are temporary. Feelings, situations, good times, bad times, they all shift. Nothing is permanent.
And the text suggests this view helps them navigate everything with more, maybe, equanimity. They can appreciate the good moments without desperately trying to cling to them, and they can endure the tough times knowing this too shall pass. They don't get stuck.
Yeah, it builds resilience by preventing you from getting totally fused with your current emotional state or circumstances.
So, looking back at this whole list, these 15 things emotionally strong people reportedly don't do. It really does paint a different picture of strength, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not about being invulnerable or emotionless.
Not at all.
It seems to be more about clarity, seeing reality, your inner world and the outer world a bit more clearly, without so many distortions from fear or ego. It's about acceptance and choosing where to put your energy.
Focusing on your own responses, your perspective, the things you can influence, rather than getting caught in these draining behaviors like judging or catastrophizing or needing external applause.
Exactly. It's almost like strength comes from letting go of certain things rather than acquiring new ones, releasing baggage.
Which kind of leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. If emotional strength, as this source presents it, is significantly shaped by the things you refrain from doing, what might happen if you picked just one thing from this list? Maybe the one that made you nod the most, or maybe the one that made you cringe a little. And what if you just consciously decided to try and stop doing that one thing, even just for a day or a week? What new space or possibilities might open up for you simply by removing that one internal barrier?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into strength from a different angle.